This interview is part of the History Heard project. The content of this interview may be used for historical research. However, no part of the video itself may be reproduced without the express written permission of an authorized representative of History Heard. Today is June 25th, 2009 at, what time is it, 1?
This is in Reston, Virginia.
This is an interview with Vint Cerf in Reston, Virginia. He was born on June 23rd, 1943 in New Haven.
You asked about the Interplanetary Network, and I insist on
Oh,
putting
yes,
a little
yes,
bit in
please.
there about that because it's very exciting.
Yes, yes.
One of the purposes behind these interviews is to get people excited. Well, I can tell you that I'm having as much excitement from the Interplanetary extension as I got from doing the original work with Bob 35 years ago. There's a group of people at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, a small group, like 4 or 5 people, and a group at MITRE Corporation here in Northern Virginia. And we got together in the spring of 1998. I had been thinking in the previous year about how long it had taken to get the internet where it was then.
Right.
Because in 1997, it was 24 years from the time that Bob and I did the original work. And so I was thinking, okay, it's 1997. What should I be doing now that will be needed 25 years from now? And after thinking about it for a while, I said, well, why don't we think about how to extend this thing so that it would support manned and robotic space exploration across the solar system? So how do we build an interplanetary internet? And I met with the teams from JPL and MITRE while I was in my offices at MCI when I was still working there. And we were completing each other's sentences, within the first 30 seconds, so it was very exciting. So I was invited to become a distinguished visiting scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory around 1998, and we began the design work. And we very quickly discovered that the TCP/IP protocols didn't work very well over interplanetary distances. And that's because the distances are astronomical, right? The speed of light is too slow. When you think about it, when Earth and Mars are in their respective orbits, when we're closest together, it's 35 million miles. And at the speed of light, that takes 3.5 minutes. And of course, round trip is twice that.
Yeah.
And when we're farthest apart in our orbits, it's 235 million miles. And that's about 20 minutes one way, 40 minutes round trip time. Well, TCP is a very interactive protocol. And the flow control, for example, consists of a very simple thing. When you run out of room, you say, stop, I'm out of room. Well, if it's a few hundred milliseconds or tens of milliseconds before the other guy hears you say, I'm out of room, that works okay. There may be a few packets still in flight, and then the guy stops until you say, okay, the window's open again. But if the thing you're communicating with is 20 minutes away, one way, it'll be another 20 minutes before this guy hears you say stop. And of course he's pumping data at high speed and packets are falling all over the place. So flow control doesn't work. Then there's this other problem called celestial motion. And this is, planets are rotating and we haven't figured out how to stop that. So if you're talking to something on the surface of a planet and in a direct path to Earth, with the Deep Space Network that was built back in 1964, big 70-meter dishes in 3 places on the surface. And as the Earth turns, these things are able to see out into the solar system to talk to the spacecraft. So if the planets are rotating, then the thing you're talking to may be on the wrong side of the planet, so your communication is broken. Or if you're in an orbiting satellite, you may be behind the planet and can't talk. So this interplanetary environment is disruptive, and it's also variably delayed.
Right.
TCP is not really, doesn't function very well under those conditions. So we very quickly realized we had to design a new suite of protocols that we ultimately recognized were called Delay and Disruption Tolerant Networking Protocols, or DTN for short. So we spent about 5 years iterating on the designs. Then we started implementing things. And at this point, last year, 2008, late in 2008, we began doing tests with a spacecraft that was called Deep Impact. So it's like 2 or 3 years ago, it rendezvoused with a comet and sent a probe into the core of the comet to expose the interior. Our scientific interest, is that that's primordial material. It's what the solar system is made of. So what was it made of?
Yeah.
So that mission was accomplished. The spacecraft launched the probe, got the data back. The spacecraft itself is in eccentric orbit around the Sun. So last October, it was en route towards Earth. And at the point where it was 81 light seconds away, NASA gave my team permission to upload the protocols to the spacecraft. So for a month, we were sending data back and forth while it's coming towards Earth. Then they said, well, you know, we're going to repurpose the satellite to go visit another comet. And so they renamed the satellite Epoxy because it's going to visit a different comet. And so it's now, you know, surrounding the Sun and on its way back out again. Then we got permission this year to upload our protocols to some computer equipment on board the International Space Station. So during the last few weeks, we've been sending data back and forth to the space station using the same DTN protocols. We now have permission to upload the protocols to the new Epoxy spacecraft, well, the old Epoxy spacecraft, as it's en route outward again. And so by the fall of this year, maybe August or September, we'll actually be doing the 3-node interplanetary test, Earth, the Epoxy spacecraft, and the International Space Station. Then, to make things even more interesting, in the first quarter of 2010, we don't know for sure, but we may get the permission to put these protocols on board a commercial satellite called Intelsat 14. And that'll be, I don't know where it is, over the Atlantic or the Pacific, I actually don't remember. But if we get permission to do that, then we'll have a 4-node system that we can test. Now, we're not suggesting to anyone that these particular spacecraft are the ones that you should build an interplanetary backbone out of. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is simply space qualifying the implementations of the interplanetary protocols. Once they're qualified, NASA calls this Technology Readiness Level 8, TRL8, meaning it's ready to deploy in real missions. So if we complete all the tests successfully by sometimes towards the end of this year or the beginning of 2010, we can say the protocols have been tested, they work, we can now use them in new missions that are going to be launched. Not only are we going to offer that to NASA, but we're going to offer it to all the other spacefaring countries. The Japanese, the JAXA, the Europeans, ESA, and the Russians and the Chinese and so on. So there's this consultative committee on space data systems that standardizes communications in space. So we're offering the implementation and the specifications of the protocols to CCSDS for standardization. The consequences of adopting these protocols are fairly significant because once you start using them, it means that these spacecraft can interwork from the communication point of view. So just like you can connect to the internet and talk to 625 million servers, any spacecraft that adopts these protocols, in theory, can communicate with any other one. So if they adopt these protocols, then over time, as new missions get launched and finish their missions, they can be repurposed to become part of an interplanetary backbone. And so this thing will grow over your lifetimes to a significant backbone communication system, and that means for both manned and for robotic space exploration, when you launch a new mission, you don't have to bring all of the communication resources with you because there's other stuff out there that you can interwork with. And just to put the cherry on the top of the ice cream sundae, this notion has already been very successfully demonstrated with the rovers on Mars, because both of them are relaying their information to orbiting satellites around Mars in order to get the information back to Earth. And I don't have time to go into the details, but it turned out the original plan, which was to go straight back to Earth from the surface of Mars, didn't work out because there was a problem with the radios that were designed to do that. When they landed the Phoenix lander on the North Pole, they designed it to do store and forward because there wasn't any direct path back. Having had this successful experiment with, or actually recovery with the rovers on Mars, they decided to use the same technique for the Phoenix spacecraft. So those were demonstrations of what's called store and forward communication. That's what the DTN is all about. That's what the internet is all about. And it works.
Wow, that's really cool.